Most men don't wake up one morning and think, this is it, I'm breaking. No, for most men, collapse isn't an explosion, it's an erosion. A quiet, steady wearing down of something inside. Something they didn't even know could run out. This story begins long before the breaking point. It begins with small moments, so harmless, so ordinary, that no one pays attention to them. Not even him. At first it's just fatigue, not the kind you fix with sleep. A deeper one, the kind that sits behind the eyes. He notices he no longer wakes up with any sense of anticipation. He gets out of bed not because he wants to, but because he has to. Because that's what a man does. The first signs aren't dramatic. He starts skipping breakfast. He lets messages sit unanswered. He listens to people speak, but realizes he didn't hear a word they said. He walks into a room and forgets why he came. Nothing catastrophic, nothing alarming. If you asked him how he feels, he'd say, just tired. People around him think the same thing. You need a vacation. You're overworking. You're probably stressed. And maybe they're not wrong, but they're not right either. Because this isn't about stress. It's about silence. A silence that grows inside a man when the weight he carries slowly increases quietly, invisibly, until one day it becomes heavier than he expected. The erosion continues. He stops sharing what's on his mind. At first, because he doesn't want to bother anyone. Later, because he doesn't have the energy to explain it. By the time he realizes it, he's already moved half his inner world into a locked room where no one enters. Not even him. He begins to lose small pieces of himself. The jokes he used to tell disappear. The spark in his eyes dims. The hobbies he once loved become chores he doesn't have time for. He tells people he's fine, but his tone is empty. He smiles, but the smile doesn't reach his eyes. He shows up, but it's more of a silhouette than a person. And yet, no one notices the shift. Why would they? He still functions. He still works. He still listens. He still carries everything he's supposed to carry. Men don't break when they fall. They break when they keep standing. Every day, he adds one more responsibility to the pile. One more task. One more expectation. One more thing he must be for someone else. And every day, he subtracts something small from himself. His rest, his joy, his curiosity, his peace. These disappear not with a bang, but with a whisper. He starts withdrawing from others, not because he doesn't care, but because he doesn't have space left. Conversations feel heavy. Small talk feels pointless. Even replying, "I'm good, you," feels like work. And still, no alarms ring. No one suspects anything. Why would they? He's still the reliable one, the steady one, the one who never complains, never breaks down, never asks for help. But here's the truth men rarely admit. When a man carries too much, he doesn't drop the weight. He drops himself. And every silent step he takes away from his own needs, every ignored feeling, every swallowed frustration, every unspoken fear brings him closer to a breaking point he can't see coming. Because this is how men collapse. Not loudly, not dramatically, not suddenly, but slowly, silently, invisibly. A quiet erosion that starts long before the world even knows something is wrong. And for him, the worst part is this. He doesn't realize it either. But the real breaking point didn't come from something big. It came from something he didn't even notice. The day everything shifted wasn't dramatic. No catastrophe, no emergency, no last straw moment that movies love to show. It was a Tuesday, just an ordinary Tuesday. He woke up before the alarm, not because he was rested, but because his mind had been awake for hours, replaying the same thoughts over and over. He lay there staring at the ceiling, unable to find the motivation to move, but unable to stay still either. The exhaustion felt different that morning. Thicker, heavier, like his bones were coated in cement. He sat up, rubbed his face, and realized his hands were shaking. Not from fear, not from cold, from something he couldn't name. He pushed himself through the morning routine the way men are trained to do. Automatically, efficiently, without thought. Shower, clothes, keys, wallet, Get out the door. But as he walked to his car, he felt it. That strange pressure inside his chest, like someone had reached in and tightened a fist around his lungs. He paused, took a deep breath, and forced himself to keep moving. Just tired, he whispered to no one. But he wasn't tired. He was breaking. At work, he sat in front of his computer, staring at the screen, realizing he had been reading the same sentence for 10 minutes. His mind wouldn't connect to anything. It felt like trying to start a car with a dead engine. The key turns, but nothing catches. People walked past his desk, smiling, talking, moving normally. And he sat there feeling like glass, transparent, fragile, ready to shatter from the slightest touch. Someone asked him, "Hey, you good?" He looked up with a practiced smile. "Yeah, just didn't sleep well." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. He felt his heartbeat in his throat, his jaw tight, his chest tense, his vision slightly blurred. A storm was building inside him, but from the outside, he looked the same as always. That's the curse of the silent collapse. Everyone sees the mask. No one sees the man behind it. At lunch, he didn't eat. He sat in his car, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the dashboard as if it might give him answers. The silence was loud in a way he had never experienced before. Every second felt sharp. Every breath felt shallow. And then it happened. Not a breakdown. Not tears. Not panic. Just nothing. A numbness so complete it frightened him. Every emotion he had been carrying, the frustration, the loneliness, the stress, the expectations suddenly disappeared. Not in relief, but in absence. It was like someone had flipped a switch inside him and shut the whole system down. He felt disconnected from everything, from his work, from his life, from himself. He rested his forehead on the steering wheel and whispered, "What is wrong with me?" But nothing was wrong. Actually, everything was. His collapse didn't come from weakness. It came from years of quiet strength used the wrong way. Holding everything in, carrying the weight alone, never asking for help, ignoring the warnings because men don't fall apart. But they do. They just do it silently. He drove home that evening in a haze. The world around him blurred into colors and light. He passed familiar streets, familiar houses, familiar signs, but everything felt distant, like he was watching his own life from outside his body. When he finally parked, he didn't get out of the car. He sat there, engine off, lights dim, silence heavy. And for the first time in years, he felt fear. Not fear of life, but fear that if he didn't stop, something inside him would. He wasn't wrong. Because this quiet collapse wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of the moment he finally had to face what he had been running from. The days after that silent collapse didn't look dramatic from the outside. There were no scenes, no outbursts, no visible breakdowns. But inside, everything was shifting. He woke up feeling like he was underwater. Sounds muffled, thoughts slow, every movement requiring effort he didn't know how to summon. He noticed things he had never paid attention to before. His phone buzzing made him flinch. Small tasks suddenly felt impossible. Conversations drained him within seconds. Loud noises felt like someone scraping metal inside his skull. The world hadn't changed, but his capacity to carry it had. He started avoiding people, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't have the strength to perform anymore. The small smiles, the nods, the "I'm fine," the emotional labor of appearing normal. Even replying to messages felt like climbing a hill with weights tied to his ankles. When people asked, "You okay?" he heard something new underneath it. Expectation. Expectation to reassure them. Expectation to stay stable. Expectation to be the version of himself they knew. He couldn't meet any of those expectations. And that terrified him. Because men are taught to fear only one thing more than failure: being seen struggling. That week, little cracks started showing. He snapped at someone at work, something he had never done before. A small comment, normally harmless, landed on him like a boulder, and the frustration spilled out before he could stop it. The look on the coworker's face haunted him the entire day. Who even was that? He whispered to himself in the bathroom mirror. He didn't recognize the man staring back. His eyes looked dim. His shoulders were tense, as if holding invisible weight. He wasn't sleeping. He wasn't eating well. He wasn't recovering. One night, he sat on the edge of his bed, shoes still on, staring at the floor as minutes dripped into hours. He didn't cry. He couldn't. His emotions were stuck somewhere deep, locked behind a wall he couldn't access anymore. That's the worst part of burnout no one talks about. It doesn't always look like overwhelm. Sometimes it looks like emotional silence, a dead battery pretending to be functional. He tried distracting himself. Music, games, scrolling, but nothing worked. Everything felt empty. His thoughts turned darker, heavier. What's wrong with me? Why can't I handle this? Why am I falling apart over nothing? Everyone else seems fine. Why not me? He didn't know it yet, but this spiral wasn't weakness. It was the mind gasping for air after years of suppression. One night his mother called, just a casual conversation. But halfway through, she paused and said, "You sound tired, really tired. Are you sure you're okay?" He swallowed hard. Something in her tone almost broke him. The concern, the softness, the recognition. For a moment, he considered telling the truth. All of it. The numbness, the anger, the exhaustion, the fear of losing control. But the words never came out. "Yeah, I'm fine," he said quietly. And the moment he hung up, he realized something painful. He didn't know how to stop lying about being okay. Because the moment he admitted he wasn't, everything he'd been avoiding would finally surface. That night, he couldn't sleep. His mind was a storm of unfinished thoughts, fears, memories. The silence was too loud. And somewhere between midnight and sunrise, he whispered to himself, "I can't keep doing this." He meant it, every word. He was reaching his limit, the point men don't talk about, don't prepare for, don't know how to face. And in the next chapter, the world around him, his relationships, responsibilities, expectations, would start to collide with the internal collapse he could no longer hide. Because the breaking point doesn't happen all at once. It arrives in small moments that stack until something gives. The shift started subtly. Small things he didn't think anyone would notice. They did. His boss pulled him aside after a meeting. "You seem distracted today. Everything okay?" It was said politely, even kindly, but he still felt the hidden message. "Get yourself together. We need you functioning." He nodded, forced a smile, gave the standard, "Yeah, just tired," and walked away trying to steady his breathing. On his lunch break, he sat alone in his car. Not because he wanted space, but because being around people felt suffocating. Every voice, every request, every question pushed against a wall that was already cracking. He stared at the steering wheel, tapping it lightly with his fingers, the rhythmic motion calming him for a moment, until his phone buzzed. A message from a friend. "Bro, you've been ghosting the chat. Everything cool?" Another. "You coming Saturday? We haven't seen you in a while." And then the one that hit the hardest. "You acting weird lately. Did I do something?" He closed his eyes. He didn't have the energy to reassure anyone. He didn't have the energy to explain. Even typing, "I'm just tired," felt like lifting a weight he couldn't carry. So he did what he had been doing for weeks. He ignored the messages. But the guilt didn't ignore him. It sat in his chest, heavy, pulsing, whispering, "You're disappointing people again. You're withdrawing. You're failing your relationships. You're becoming a problem." By late afternoon, his mind was a storm again. At home, things weren't any calmer. His apartment felt colder, messier, darker, though it hadn't changed. He had. Days blended into each other. Nights were long, filled with restless tossing and thoughts that wouldn't quiet. One evening, while microwaving dinner he didn't even want, a knock on the door startled him. It was his friend, Daniel. The one who always noticed things others didn't. "You good? You fell off the planet, man." He tried to joke it off. "Just tired. Work's been wild." But Daniel wasn't buying it. "You're not just tired. You look done." Not accusatory. Not dramatic. Just honest. Those words landed somewhere deep, and for a moment, he felt like a balloon stretched too thin. But the instinct kicked in. The instinct every man is conditioned to follow. Minimize, deflect, reassure. I'm Fine. Really, just need a few quiet days. Daniel hesitated, searching his eyes. If you say so, but listen, if something's wrong, you don't have to deal with it alone. He felt something twist inside him, because he wanted to believe that. He really did. But another voice inside, older, heavier, said, "No one can help you. Don't burden people. Stay strong. Handle it." That voice always won. After Daniel left, the silence felt even heavier, the kind of silence that presses on your lungs. He sat on the couch, staring at nothing, replaying the conversation. Not because it was dramatic, but because it scared him how easily he lied, even to the one person who genuinely cared. The more he tried to function normally, the more difficult it became. Even simple tasks felt like moving through thick mud. Laundry piled up, dishes sat in the sink. His bed became a place he avoided because sleep never came, his motivation evaporated, his emotions stayed locked. But the worst part was the volatility. He felt like he was walking around with a cracked glass heart. One wrong word, one unexpected problem, one demand too many, and it would shatter. The next day it did. A coworker asked him to redo a report he had already spent hours on. Normally he would have nodded, redone it, moved on. But that day, the request hit like a punch to the chest. He felt the heat rise in his face. His throat tightened, his vision narrow. "I don't have time for this," he snapped, louder than he meant to. The room went silent. His coworker stared. He felt the shame instant and sharp, burning under his skin. I'm sorry, I didn't mean," but the words tangled in his mouth. He rushed out, heading straight to the restroom, locking himself in a stall, gripping the sink edge so hard his knuckles whitened. His breath trembled. His eyes burned. He couldn't cry. He couldn't scream. He just stood there, trembling, realizing something terrifying. He wasn't holding it together anymore. He was holding together the pieces of a man who was already breaking, and the world was finally starting to see it. He didn't remember driving home that day. He remembered grabbing his keys. He remembered stepping outside. He remembered the cold air hitting his face. But the actual drive, the streets, the traffic lights, the turns was a blur. He was on autopilot, a passenger inside his own body. When he finally parked outside his building, his hand was shaking so hard he could barely pull the key out of the ignition. He sat there, in the dark, his face lit only by the faint glow of the dashboard, his breath unsteady, his chest tight, his mind racing in chaotic circles. What the hell is happening to me? He had been stressed before, exhausted before, overwhelmed before. But this was different. This felt like something had snapped. Not loudly, not with a dramatic explosion, but quietly, the way a rope breaks one fiber at a time until finally the last thread gives out. He leaned his head back against the seat, staring at the car's ceiling. And for the first time in years, he felt the sting of tears. Not the dramatic kind, not sobbing, not shaking. Just silent, slow tears that rolled down his cheeks uncontrollably. Tears for everything he'd carried, everything he'd swallowed, everything he'd pretended wasn't heavy. He wiped them quickly, almost angrily, ashamed even though he was completely alone. Inside his apartment, the silence hit even harder than before. He dropped his bag on the floor, didn't turn on the lights, and just stood there in the darkness, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator. He felt hollow. He moved mechanically, like a man inside a dream he couldn't wake from. He poured himself a glass of water, didn't drink it. He sat on the edge of his bed, didn't lie down. He felt suspended, caught between breaking and holding on. And then, his phone buzzed again. A message from his mother. Just a casual, "How are you doing, dear?" A simple text. But somehow, it was the final straw. Not because it was demanding, not because it added pressure, but because it reminded him how long it had been since he had honestly answered that question. He stared at the screen until his vision blurred. His thumb hovered, the way it had countless times over the past months. He typed, "I'm fine," the easiest lie in the world for a man to tell. But as he stared at those two words, something inside him recoiled. There was a sudden wave of self-disgust. Not at her, not at the message, but at himself for being so afraid of honesty. He deleted the words, typed again, deleted again. His hands trembled. He wanted to write what he really felt. I'm tired. I'm not okay. I feel like I'm falling apart. But the conditioning ran too deep. Instead, he locked the phone and tossed it onto the bed. He stood up, pacing the room, running a hand through his hair. The pressure inside his chest built like steam inside a sealed pipe. And that's when it happened. He suddenly felt dizziness wash over him, a wave of lightheadedness so strong he had to grab the wall to steady himself. His heart pounded erratically, his limbs tingled, his breathing went shallow. For a split second, he wondered, am I having a heart attack? The fear hit him like a tidal wave. His breath quickened, his vision narrowed, his legs felt weak. He stumbled onto the floor, sitting against the wall, gasping, trying to drag air into his lungs. His hands went numb. His thoughts spiraled. What if I die here? No one knows I'm not okay. No one knows I need help. I can't breathe. Why can't I breathe? It wasn't a heart attack. It was a panic attack. But he didn't know that. All he knew was that his body was shutting down under the weight he had been carrying silently for far too long. Minutes passed before the shaking slowed, before his breath steadied, before the world stopped spinning. When he finally opened his eyes, he felt drained, as if something had been emptied from him, something he could never refill. This moment didn't fix him. It didn't heal him. It didn't give him clarity, but it did something else. It forced him to face the truth he had been avoiding. He wasn't just tired. He wasn't fine. He wasn't dealing with it. He was collapsing. Quietly, privately, the way so many men do, until something inside them finally gives way. He didn't go to work the next morning. For the first time in 7 years, he simply didn't. He didn't call in sick, didn't send an email, didn't explain himself. He just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of traffic outside his window. His body felt heavy, as if gravity had doubled overnight. Every thought felt like it weighed a ton. But there was one thought, quiet, almost timid, that kept resurfacing. Something has to change. Not tomorrow. Not when things calm down. Not someday. Now. But change isn't a lightning strike. It doesn't happen in a dramatic flash. For men like him, it begins in whispers, subtle realizations, tiny shifts, the smallest acts of honesty after years of silence. The first whisper came when he finally picked up the phone. Not to call his boss, not to reassure anyone, but to call a doctor. Not because he was weak, but because he was terrified he wasn't strong enough to keep pretending. When he heard the receptionist's voice, his own cracked slightly. "Hi, I think I need to come in. Something's wrong." He half expected her to ask what, to demand details, to judge him. Instead, she simply said, "Come in this afternoon. We'll figure it out." It was the first time in months someone spoke to him with no expectations. But the real turning point wasn't the call. It came in the waiting room. He sat there, surrounded by complete strangers, a coughing teenager, an old man reading a newspaper, a woman scrolling her phone. Yet he felt more connected to them than he had to anyone in his life lately. Because none of them were asking anything from him. "No, can you handle this?" "No, I need you to fix that." "No, you'll figure it out, right?" For the first time, he wasn't performing. He was just there. When the doctor finally saw him, he didn't tell some polished, minimized version of the truth. He didn't use the usual lines. "It's been stressful. It's nothing. I'm fine." He told him everything. The exhaustion, the pressure, the panic attack, the fear, the numbness, the feeling of losing control. And instead of being told to man up, he heard something he hadn't heard in years. "You've been carrying too much for too long." That sentence hit him harder than the panic attack, because it was the first time someone recognized the weight he'd been burying under layers of silence. The doctor talked about burnout, chronic stress, panic disorders, emotional overload, words he had never allowed himself to consider. And then the doctor said something even more important. You're not broken. You're overwhelmed. And overwhelmed men don't need to be punished. They need support. Support. The word felt foreign, but it stirred something in him. The next turning point came unexpectedly on his walk home. It was cold, the type of cold that wakes you up, sharp and honest. He pulled his jacket tighter, watching people rush past him, wrapped in their own worlds. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel invisible. He felt human. He stopped at a small coffee shop, the kind he usually rushed past. He ordered a drink, sat down, and simply breathed. No phone, no obligations, no expectations. He noticed things he had forgotten to pay attention to: the warmth of the cup in his hands, the soft hum of conversation, the smell of roasted coffee beans. Tiny details, but they grounded him. And then, in that quiet moment, he had a realization. He had built his entire life around being needed, but never around being okay. He had taken responsibility for everyone: co-workers, friends, family, partners, but never for himself. He had been the problem solver, the fixer, the dependable one, the strong one, without ever noticing that the strongest men are often the closest to collapsing. That strength without rest becomes weakness. That giving without receiving becomes emptiness. That silence becomes a cage. And in that small coffee shop, he understood something. He could not survive another breakdown, but he could survive a breakthrough. Not the dramatic kind, not the Hollywood kind, but the slow, steady, internal shift that begins with a single, simple truth. I deserve to take care of myself too. He wasn't healed. Not yet. Not even close. But he had taken one step, the hardest step. He stopped pretending he was fine. And once a man stops pretending, everything changes. He didn't wake up the next day feeling reborn. There was no rush of motivation, no sudden clarity, no dramatic life epiphany. Real healing rarely looks like that. It looks like waking up tired, but not exhausted, heavy, but not crushed. It looks like getting out of bed because you chose to, not because you were forced to. And that small difference changes everything. The first real step in his rebuild wasn't therapy or quitting his job or cutting people off. It was something far more uncomfortable. He finally told someone the truth. Not the polished version. Not the "I'm just stressed lately." Not the "I'll be fine." He picked one person he trusted, a friend he hadn't opened up to in years, and said the words men swallow until they choke on them. "I'm not okay." There was a long pause on the phone. He almost regretted saying it. But his friend didn't laugh, didn't shame him, didn't act awkward. He simply said, "Say no more. I've got you." For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar wash over him. Relief. Because when a man carries everything alone for too long, the first moment someone finally shares even 5% of the weight feels like breathing for the first time. He didn't quit his job, not immediately, but he set his first boundary. He told his boss he needed fewer late-night calls, shorter weeks, more recovery time. He expected backlash, punishment, disappointment. Instead, he got something else entirely. Take what you need, and thank you for being honest. It shocked him. Because men are taught that asking for help is weakness, when, ironically, it's the first real act of control. The next part of his rebuild happened quietly. He deleted a few numbers from his phone, people who only reached out when they needed something, people who drained him, people who used him. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't anger. It was preservation. And then he did something men rarely allow themselves to do. He made space. Space to breathe. Space to reflect. Space to figure out who he was without constant pressure. He rediscovered small pleasures, morning walks, long showers, music he used to love. He read books again. He cooked for himself. He slept, truly slept, for the first time in years. And slowly, something began to shift. He noticed that the world didn't fall apart when he stopped being the one who held it together. People didn't collapse without him. Life went on, and so did he. But the real transformation came later, when he looked in the mirror and realized something profound. He didn't want his old life back. Not the stress, not the pressure, not the unspoken expectations, not the invisible sacrifices. Because the collapse didn't break him, it freed him. It stripped away everything he had been pretending to be. The unshakable man, the provider, the problem solver, the emotional landfill, the silent warrior who never faltered. And beneath all that was someone he hadn't met in years. Someone honest, someone grounded, someone who knew his limits, not just his responsibilities. Someone who cared about himself as much as he cared about others. Someone real. And that's the part no one tells men. They don't collapse because they're weak. They collapse because they stayed strong for too long, without rest, without connection, without honesty. But what matters most is what happens after the collapse. If a man faces himself, truly faces himself, he rebuilds stronger. Not harder, not colder, not numb. Stronger. Because real strength isn't carrying everything alone. Real strength is knowing what is yours to carry and letting go of everything else. At the end of it all, he didn't become a new man. He simply became himself again. And for the first time, he wasn't afraid of being seen.